Food, actually I should probably address it by its correct name, food, glorious food. It's one of those rare industries though that's got an army of unregulated critics. Mind you, I don't know about you, I've always taken a critic's view as being somebody telling you what their opinion of, in this case, food is or a particular dish is, and you may or may not agree. It's as simple as that. For example, if it's something you don't enjoy eating, it doesn't matter how good the review is, you are never going to enjoy it. And of course, nowadays a lot of these unregulated critics are making a rather lucrative living from their written opinions of what is, first and foremost, a business. And that is before the public give their social media reviews, which of course people can do, and in some cases quite vexatiously, online. In fact, it would be fair to say that no other industry endures such unpredictable scrutiny without the right of reply. I must admit, that's one of the big issues I have with things like TripAdvisor and stuff like that, the inability of people to have a right of reply. The inability of somebody to go back to somebody and say, listen, you know what they've written here is just blatantly untrue. And at some point, I think we ought to get to the position where we say, if you're going to write something about somebody or somebody's business, substantiate it. Food reviews, of course, do have the capacity to sway potential clientele. Around 90% of people have turned to online reviews before making a decision. So here's the reality. Cafes and restaurants are bound to face a negative review or two at some point. And it really does boil down to how the business owners respond to negative reviews. Restaurants are a high labour business model relying on variations in the supply chain, which of course are all difficult to manage. So if you want predictability, stick with McDonald's. McDonald's have got it right because they've created a certain level of expectation. Regardless of how you feel about fast food, if you rock up to the drive-thru at Macca's and you ask for a Big Mac and fries and a Coke, you know what you're going to get. And it's probably not unfair to suggest it would be very, very rare that you would complain about what you got. You may be one of these people who hasn't had that kind of food for a long time, 2 or 3 years, then you have it and you go, geez, I know now why I haven't had it before. But that doesn't mean that the product itself wasn't up to standard. It just means that you were reminded of the standard that you'd previously rejected. But when you're talking about other restaurants, it gets a little bit more complicated. We're joined on the program by Christine Green, who's a hospitality expert. Hi, Christine.
Hi, Chris. How are you?
Listen, I reckon if I was a business, sometimes I'd be really cranky because the one problem I have, especially with online reviews, so many people, of course, are looking at online reviews. So many people are basing their decision to dine or not dine at a particular establishment based on online reviews. Yet some reviews are purely vexatious and in the great wash-up are not true, yet a business could potentially profoundly be affected by it.
Yep. To me, it sort of tips over into a form of bullying. You've got 3 things that a restaurant or cafe faces now. They've got the proper qualified food critic who's seasoned and is supposed to be quite objective in how they rank and critique an establishment. Then you've got the food blogger. They put their 2 cents worth in. And then you've got the general public. What business undergoes so much scrutiny while they're battling to keep the doors open? And running a restaurant and cafe, it's a really tough gig. It's just one of those business models that has a lot of spinning plates and it's quite intense. McDonald's, as you said, have crafted the art of having processes and systemisation. Everything's the same. The menu's the same. I can remember when our local McDonald's opened in the 80s, not talking about age, of course. It was just like this amazing new food concept and everyone was raving about it. The contents of the menu today is still pretty much the same. They've added a few things around the edges, but it's still the same food. And yet you don't see food bloggers and food critics lining up to annihilate McDonald's on the basis of what they do or don't do in their restaurant. And yet they'll do that to a restaurant or cafe. I get quite perplexed about it and I feel really sorry for restaurant and cafe owners with what they have to put up with.
Just going back to the whole McDonald's thing, McDonald's delivers what it promises. And I guess that perhaps makes its job much easier because all it has to do is give you burgers to a certain standard, which you're happy with. The problem is that once you go beyond that, then there is perhaps expectations which are somewhat different. And this is where a restaurant might run into trouble because somebody may believe that a restaurant, for example, is more upmarket than it really is.
Okay, so look at your favourite smashed avo on toast. You've got different types of toast. You've got sourdough, you've got wholemeal, you've got rye, you've got whether you get feta cheese or some sprinkle of pumpkin seeds.
Yeah, but don't you ask
the
for all
avocado
that?
brown? I don't know. I've seen reviews about smashed avo on toast. If you're going to get that pedantic about the quality of a location and a small business owner, I think that's starting to step into bullying.
How do we delineate between the two? Where is something a fair criticism of something where you can say, I was honestly dissatisfied? And where does it dovetail into bullying? Whether we like it or not, people pull it on. They think if they jump up and down about something, what's going to happen is instantly they're going to get offered something. To put it bluntly, some people use it as a form of scamming to get something for free.
Yeah, that's happened, I think it was last year or the year before in Brisbane. Beautiful little Italian restaurant, one of our favourites, run by a family, located in Brisbane City. And some scammers went in and said that they found a hair inside their pasta or their dish that they were eating. And the owners, they're really diligent food operators. They thought these people were a little bit suspect. I think they had a child or a toddler in a pram as well. Anyway, long story short, they checked their video cameras and they actually saw the person pull the hair out of their own head and put it into the food, and they were trying to get a free meal. But they'd eaten everything before they complained about the hair in the food. The whole process was just purely to get a free meal and get up and walk out. And it really went bananas on social media. I'm pretty sure you could Google it. You'll come up with the story. And I felt like the restaurant owners handled it really, really well. Scammers, they're absolutely there. Anytime you're dealing with the public, you are at the risk of having someone having a go. That's why a lot of cafes and restaurants have cameras.
And how often, though, do they just simply say, yeah, well, okay, we'll give you a free this or a free that, simply because they don't want the aggro that could potentially go with it?
I think the business owner has to make that call. If you're a business owner, someone in front of you is quite inflamed and antagonistic and you feel like there's a safety issue there, I think you've got to do whatever diffuses the situation, and that is from the public as well. You don't know what's going to escalate right there and then because you really don't know who you're dealing with. And there's other times where I think the restaurant owner or the cafe owner needs to stand their ground and maybe offer a substitution or an alternative solution rather than a straight-out cash refund. It's a really tough call at that point, or maybe they're happy to say, you know what, you don't fit our demographic as a preferred customer anyway. Thanks, but no thanks. And they just walk out. And they're happy to say goodbye to that sort of clientele.
Becomes a judgment call, doesn't it? And, of course, the one thing that you have to do is realise that if you blow one customer off, you've also blown several others that you've never met off because, sure as God made little apples, they are definitely going to have a conversation with their friends. And
most of the time it's online as well. So that then comes to the next point, which is how does that business owner deal with negative reviews online? Do they try and turn it into a positive? Do they attack back? Because sometimes the attacking back process can actually take it to another level that isn't good for anybody else. A lot of the online TripAdvisor and things like that, the business owner can't delete the negative reviews or comments, so they do have to deal with them in the public space.
We had an incident here, and I know I've mentioned it on this program before, so I don't want to dwell on it because I know that people have heard the story before. But it happened to one of a restaurateur who's a regular contributor to another segment on this radio station, a guy called Clyde Bevan from Friends Restaurant here in Perth, a fine dining restaurant. It's the kind of place where you get dressed up and you're going to a fine dining restaurant. You get exactly what you expect, and that's exactly what Clyde and Leslie do. It was Mother's Day, so they were full anyway. And these two women who'd obviously been out riding or jogging or doing something that derived copious amounts of sweat, and they'd got themselves encased in lycra and other fairly casual-looking clothing and the accompanying sweat, and they wanted a table. And Clyde or Leslie, I don't know which one, quite politely and quite correctly said, well, we don't have any tables because Mother's Day we were booked out for months in advance anyway. They weren't dressed for going out to such an establishment anyway. Nobody would dress like that. Fine if you want to grab some takeaway from McDonald's. There's a McDonald's example again. Well, they jumped online and wrote a very, very nasty review. Now, Clyde is a very considered, a very polite, very well-mannered man, but he's not going to lie down and let somebody wipe their feet on him like he's a doormat either. And he did respond to them, and he did so in a measured, considered, albeit very polite way. And these two women ended up looking like a prize pair of gooses. It never occurred to them that, firstly, it's Mother's Day. Lots of places were going to be booked out for Mother's Day anyway. And secondly, they turned up to a fine dining establishment in sweaty lycra and T-shirts, and then they go away and they write a nasty review. To me, Christine, that is the textbook definition of vexatious, and that's the sort of thing that these online reviewers need to be able to moderate and need to be able to say, well, hang on a second, this person isn't reasonable. I should point out that once again they had all the necessary photographic evidence.
Restaurants, they're building you an experience. They're not just serving you the food. And if that experience means they want to stipulate what type of clothing is worn to add to the overall ambience, that's that business owner's choice. And if you step in their establishment, you have to follow their policies and what they are presenting for the experience. If you don't like it, you go to the one down the street. It's really simple. Why have you got the right to be a bully and tell that business owner how to run their business?
I would have thought the way you tell a business owner how they run the business, whether they think it's good or bad, is by giving or withdrawing your patronage, depending on how you feel.
Yep. The online bullying stuff, there's so many topics around what we're talking about here. There's a radio station, they did absolutely no commentary or talking. It was straight out listening because today was their day of silence because 6 men suicide each day. And a lot of that is in the blue-collar worker level of employment. Chefs are classed in that category. There's nothing worse for a chef than being insulted as to what they're producing at the table. As soon as they see somebody sitting at the table, whipping out a camera, starting to take photos and write comments about what they're about to eat, even if it is just a smash avo on toast, that's bloody stressful. I don't know about you, but I'd be freaking out every 5 minutes if someone's just about to throw something online about how good my performance is and I don't know them from a bar of soap. I think that there's more around this whole food critiquing scenario and the impact that it's having that people aren't understanding. It's hurting people. So if you're going to write about something, add that something wasn't quite right, but add a positive with it. Without the sarcasm, without the bullying, do no harm. But say I would have preferred if my coffee was hotter, but the froth was 2 inches high and I love it like that. Do you know what I mean? It's got to be built around a way that people can want to achieve more and achieve better, but not shrink back like they're a failure. And that's where disinformation is going. It's just pushing people down into a hole.
Yeah.
And you can see I'm starting to get a little bit upset about it because just the suicide rate and the way that, mental health in kitchens and the stress and the impact that these sort of things are having, it's really serious conversation.
Yeah.
And the food critics, look, there can be some tough food critics out there, but I'll give them one thing. They usually have a structured process. They're only paid by their magazine or whatever. It's not quite objective. There's often not a hidden reason to promote one restaurant over the other or one brand of food. They have checks and measures in place and criteria that they measure by so that that's consistent from one story to the next.
Yeah.
But food bloggers don't. They're just haphazard and, the more sexy they can make their photos look, the better it is for them. But they're usually clawing towards getting some sort of recognition because there is a payback.
There's always going to be a dividend, no doubt about that. Christine, we're out of time. Thank you very much for yours.
You only just got me started. Thanks, Chris.
I kind of gathered that. Christine Green, by the way, is a hospitality expert.